Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. Hi, listeners. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Steph. This week, we have a live episode that we streamed into our Life After Diets community Facebook page. And the question that had come in as a suggested topic from one of our community members is
around exposure to certain foods. And how do you cope when you're feeling out of control around particular foods? It came up because we're recording this just after Easter. And it came up with one of our members having to be around the kids' Easter eggs. And so in this episode, we talk about exposure to these foods actually, and can we sometimes reduce our exposure to these foods without that looking like restriction or without that being some kind of psychopathology. So I think it's a great I think it's a great episode. I do think it's a great episode. And
it was fun. Yeah. So we hope you enjoy. Hi, everybody. Oh, we've got people here too. Okay. We're recording live. What are we talking about?
I don't know if Katrina's here, but this was Katrina's request about, shall I read out the request? No,
yes.
I need to read. Shall I?
I like it. I think it's orienting.
Well, Katrina's suggestion for today's episode was learning to be around, eat and enjoy foods which you love, but have been very linked to binging. In brackets, the kids' Easter eggs are currently giving me all sorts of anxiety.
Yeah. Discuss.
Oh, no, we're supposed to discuss. I didn't know if this was kind of like fear foods, but that felt a bit too big for the question. So maybe it was more about foods that can be a bit triggering, a bit challenging to be around, foods that you don't trust yourself around. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Okay. Do you have a food like that? Do you? Has that changed?
I did. So one, which I think we'll probably talk about in some detail because I know it's one of your foods, being granola. And I remember, I think it was a friend of mine basically said that granola is an orthorexic crack.
Yeah. I got to use that. There's a lot of those actually.
Mm-hmm. And here actually, I bought some granola in New York around the corner from where I am. And I paid $12 for 12 ounces of granola. It was good. It was good granola. But I realized actually as I was eating it, I thought, because I don't have granola very much now because I'm just not interested in it. I don't enjoy it very much. And when I ate it, I thought, oh yeah, don't actually like granola that much.
Oh, then why are you bringing it up?
Because I did.
Oh,
and it shifted.
Really? What? Yeah. How so?
I think it was probably one of those foods that was this gray line in my mind between what I thought of as a binge food and what I thought of as an okay food. And times when I'd be saying to myself, okay, I'm trying not to eat chocolate or foods that had more sugar in or something like that. Granola would then be like my caveat, my workaround. So for me, it was always more of a make do for actually the foods I probably would have preferred to have eaten, but thought that I shouldn't be. So I think that's what granola was for me.
So it had like more of a meaning that was assigned to it. I love granola. To me, it was more like a physical desire for it. I find the texture of it. There's something about it that is still like when I have granola, it is wonderful. I never eat it and feel like meh. I like love it so much. I just love the textures, the sweetness. And also there's a density to it, which I think sometimes is why like peanut butter and granola in particular seem to be foods I hear about a lot as far as being like this type of food that is something that someone will crave and just not be able to get enough of. And one thing I noticed is that I felt that way in recovery, even like as I was allowing myself to eat those foods, they were the ones that I wanted very, very, very much because I think there's a density to them that then hits in the stomach in a way that it fills so much. And I feel like when I eat those foods, like I can actually access fullness in a way that other foods take a lot more of to get. But because it tastes so good, you can just keep eating it as well. It's one of those foods that like an hour after I've had it, I'm really full. Like I didn't recognize how full I was because it's just so easy to eat and it is so filling. I've always wondered if in my own recovery, like my body was wanting those foods so much because they were part of the restoration. They were part of, we need to feel full more often. We need those calories in because I had been under my weight set point, which is not to say I was in any way underweight, but I was under my own because I'd been restricting for so long. And having those was very restorative for me. Whereas now, that taste hunger for them remains, but my desire for them is much more decreased. Like I don't feel like I need to have those things. It's just that I can appreciate the taste at this point. But when you've got the combination of both an urgent desire and the taste hunger, I think that that's what makes it so hard to be sane around those foods, because it feels like there's just too much going for it to have any sense of level-headedness about it. They're so compelling. That said, while my biological desire has diminished, the taste hunger remains. And for peanut butter, no problem. I could have some peanut butter and let peanut butter go, but granola is different. And I feel like when this topic came up, this was the one food that came up for me, as far as this one and one other one, which still seems to have some kind of like, I just like it so darn much. I can be around it, but I probably end up having more than I want when I do eat it. Sometimes it's more possible with that food than with any other, that and M&Ms.
So during recovery, you were eating quite a bit of granola. Did you feel out of control when you were eating in recovery?
That's not in recovery because I was allowing it. So that feeling that I would have normally called out of control, I was like, well, that's what I'm supposed to be doing here. So there was the charge wasn't as high. So that's important because when I was allowing that to happen and not making a thing of it in my mind, that out of controlness sort of just naturally dulls a little bit. Because it was like, well, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'm not fighting anything.
So tell me about M&Ms.
They're just so colorful. And
Which ones?
I don't know.
Which ones?
Just plain. I mean, I love them all, but there's something about the regular original M&Ms that are really enticing because it's texture. I want to swim in a bowl of M&Ms. Like I think they're so, like, I just want to do this with them with my hands and like, I just like think there's something about them from a sensory perspective that is, oh, like I just right now, like if I had like, they're so good and for those are one that I'm like, if I start to have M&Ms, I'm going to want like a lot more M&Ms than I really want. And there are times where I'm like, okay. And we've talked about this in a previous episode around like the consciousness of stopping. And I will employ a consciousness around stopping. And it's kind of like, okay, it's a good amount of M&Ms. I'll stop now. And it's sort of more of an effort. But there's other times where I'm like, I just want more. It doesn't turn into a binge. It's not like that, but it is a bit more of like this food has some kind of allure that is overriding my sense of where I want to stop. And that's fine with me because it doesn't turn into a binge. And I think that's because it's not pathologized and because maybe I don't know, I have more peace with being able to say, okay, that's enough. But it's different than a different food that I would be like, okay, I naturally feel like I've had enough and I'm going to stop now. Like it's a little more consciousness about it.
Do you experience that thing when somebody mentions a food or talks about a food and you like the sound of it, that then it kind of sticks around in your mind until you've had the food?
Sometimes. It doesn't really happen very often, though. Does it to you?
Well, it's just interesting you mentioned M&Ms because a friend of mine sent me a message a few days ago saying, while you're in New York, if you get the chance, can you pick me up some pretzel M&Ms? Because I don't think we sell them in the UK.
Huh.
And I thought, that sounds amazing. So I kept thinking about these pretzel M&Ms. And then when I was getting on the subway, I stopped in a shop to look for pretzel M&Ms and got a bag of pretzel M&Ms. And I'm like, oh. And they were good. I could stop thinking about the pretzel M&Ms.
Yeah, I could understand that from a curiosity perspective. Maybe not from a craving one, though. I don't think I feel that so much where it's like, oh, now I'm really craving that and I can't rest until I stop. But it might linger in my mind around like, note to self, really want to try that. I'll be on the lookout. But oddly not, and even I wouldn't have even known this about myself until this question, until right now. I don't think I feel that so much with the craving. like the way like when I was pregnant, I did. Like I would see a commercial and be like, I need to have the pizza, that kind of pizza, and I wouldn't rest until I got it. Same thing happened with Italian ice, but I don't experience it so much anymore.
It was weird for me because I bought this bag of M&Ms while I was out and I was traveling somewhere. I ate the M&Ms on the subway, and there was something about sitting and eating this bag of candy on the subway that I thought, this is weird, because there's something in it. I guess it's the same behavior, but a very different experience of it. Before, like when I was binging on the London Underground was just something I ended up doing quite a bit. I was traveling around quite a lot, and that would be because I wasn't having the foods in the house as well. So it would be, this is the moment to grab the food, and I would eat the food on the tube, and it would be this whole idea of not being able to wait. But this didn't feel like, oh, I can't wait. But I remember sitting on the subway and I was eating it, and I was like, gosh, this is like, I'm in New York and I'm eating. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't even know where I'm going with this point. But it was just,
I get it.
It's
like muscle memory.
Yes.
A little bit.
Yes.
Yeah. I hear that.
Yeah.
And to Katrina's question, which she says, like, how do you handle this kind of thing, like the kids' Easter eggs, where there is this moment of I'm doing the thing that is the behavior that I'm moving away from, but I'm doing that thing. It's such an easy slide potentially into the old behavior and the old mentality. I think the mentality can switch on. So my one daughter asked for Cadbury eggs, the little mini ones for Easter. And so they're in the house. And that would be something too that I would eat. They have an M&M quality to them, and that, like, there's many in the blue, just the way they feel. And yesterday, admittedly, I'm like, well, they all got their Cadbury eggs in their baskets. There's some left, those are mine. So they're kind of hidden. And so yesterday I was like, oh, I want some chocolate, went to the secret cabinet, got my Cadbury eggs, came in the office here and was like, it's time for my Cadbury eggs. And there was something about that experience where it's like, here's me sneaking into the stash that I've hidden away from everybody else, and running into my office to eat them in private. That has this feeling to it of like, oh, I remember, are we sneaking? And I think in the difference between when you're in recovery and this is a new thing, where it's like, this is a new experience of having a food that's maybe you're just trying to have in private because you don't want anyone else to eat it. It's a sort of like your moment. But not in a compulsive way. Your body's like, I don't know the difference. What is what? Whereas I feel like at this point, and I think it's a practice. It's kind of like time and more experiences of, no, I know how to do this. I do often come in here and have some chocolate in the afternoon, and it's not a problem. And so my brain has a memory for that too now. So it's kind of, I can understand those wires getting crossed at times, because there are times where something does feel like, ooh, I could turn that switch back the other way potentially. My body would know just what to do. Like I've been there so many times in my life that it could easily go on that track. But I think the more experience we get with being around these foods in a way that doesn't have that character, the more that we learn what that track looks like, and how to exist around that food in a non-compulsive way. And I think it's experience that teaches us these things, and how to differentiate. But in the beginning of a process, this question makes a lot of sense, because there's not as much experience with being around those foods in a way that feels okay. So the brain might be more easily confused.
And I'm also thinking, I've had a number of clients talk about eating all their kids' Easter eggs before Easter and having to replace them. And I know if I'd had to do that, I think I would have gone around and done a similar thing at that time. I'd certainly eaten food that I had bought for other people, but then I just got in the habit of not really buying edibles for people, which I didn't have to, because not having kids, it wasn't something that I personally had to navigate. Did you have to navigate that?
Oh, yes. I think I spoke about it, whether it was I wrote about it or spoke about it. When I was first with Mike, we weren't married, we were dating, and his brother has two girls who are now much older, but they were little at the time. They were 2 and 4. And I remember Mike came home to his apartment with Easter baskets that he'd gotten for the girls that had toys in it, but also plenty of candy. And I was like, oh, he's the kind of uncle that buys his nieces. That's so cute. Yeah. Well, he went to the bathroom one time or something. And I was like, and I ate it all. I don't remember if at that time he knew about my eating disorder or not. He probably did, but I think he did. But I remember when he came out from wherever he was, and he was like, or maybe I had been at the apartment before he came home from work or something like that. And he came home and the food was gone. And I was like, I ate it. And I remember I was so disgusted with myself. And he was angry. He was like, but what? This was like that point where he was starting to learn what it meant to have an eating disorder and that it wasn't logical. You know, I was like, he was like, but it was for them. And I'm like, I know. And I also knew that I could replace it. I knew they weren't coming over that minute. And I did. And I went to the pharmacy and got more chocolate and I replaced it exactly as it was. But I couldn't help myself, especially because those foods weren't allowed. And so eating things like stealing or eating things meant for other people, especially from kids, especially kids' candy, because there's something very appetizing about a children's Easter basket or Halloween candy. You know, there's this is like fun to it. It has such bad, like there's shame associated with that when my kids' candy baskets are around, there is a memory that comes up of if I eat their candy, it's like taking candy from a baby. You know what I mean? It literally feels like that. And at this point, that's been rewritten enough. But there's a lot of charged memories that can exist around foods like this that really sink into the brain, that really like speak loudly. You know, there's sort of a fear factor that can be really imprinted from experiences like that.
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode.
The ideal in recovery would probably be getting to a point where you can be around all foods and not feel compulsive. Do you think that there is a place for deliberately choosing not to expose yourself to certain foods?
Like abstinence?
I'm thinking more like, I guess something about having certain foods in the house would be one way of doing them. It could be like the example with Easter might be someone says, okay, I would rather not have the eggs in the house until Easter. So they buy them the day before.
Right.
So there's this deliberate avoidance of being around the foods. Do you think that can come from a healthy place, or do you think...
I do, but I didn't always. I think this is a really important question. So when I was in the first several years of recovery and learning about non-diet or anti-diet, actually, I believed that the goal was to habituate all foods so that anything at any time could be in the house. And the goal was to have that happen. And almost like if you needed to not do that, if you needed to buy candy later to avoid, being with it in this way, that was bad. And I've changed my mind. Because I think that, so have you heard of nudge theory? This idea of, there have been studies done on if someone is not with any sort of just, average population has a bowl of popcorn near them or a bowl of apples, and one is closer than the other, or chocolate versus an apple. It doesn't matter what the food actually is or the appeal. It's whatever's closer that the person will reach for. So even if if broccoli and dip are in front of you and the chocolate's farther away, the person might actually be more likely to go for the broccoli because it's within reach. So it's kind of this idea of like your environment nudges you towards things. And I experience that with things like granola or M&Ms, right? So it isn't a pathology. It's just more of like the environment is just suggesting it to me in a way that is a bit distracting sometimes. And then you end up eating something not because you really want it, but because the environment nudged you just a little. And there's appeal of colorful foods or sweet foods. So I would have thought like, nope, the idea is to have the M&Ms and the granola in the house no matter what. And, the fact is that there's always going to be a novel food to introduce. And if you can't possibly habituate every single novel food. So there's always going to be something nudging you potentially, like, having it around. And for me, it's kind of like, I'm not afraid of the food and I can coexist with the food, but I don't want to constantly be nudged. You know what I mean? It's a lot. Like, I have enough to do. I have enough things to like filter, and so there are things that, I don't have bowls of M&Ms in my house, not because I'm afraid of M&Ms or I won't have M&Ms, but because if they were around me all the time, I would probably eat more of them than I want to eat. And I don't think that is wrong. I think that's perfectly legitimate. And I think sometimes with the anti-diet message, there can be an overemphasis of having things because you can or because you should be able to coexist. And coexisting is one thing, but like being nudged is another. And to me, it's kind of like, no, you can set your environment up. And I think we all have a personal knowledge of where the threshold is between restriction and just like choices. And that's the art. And that has been a process that was further along in my recovery of figuring that out. Because in the beginning, it was just all foods all the time, around all the time, neutralize. And then it became more of like, what do I want to choose to have around and what do I want to choose not to have around as much, knowing that I'm not terrified of it. And if it was in my home, I could deal with that. It doesn't incite a binge, but it simply becomes choices.
That was brilliantly put. I feel like I wanted to stand up and applaud.
Oh, thanks.
I really liked that. I thought that was so useful. And it made me, because I was thinking when we started this episode, I thought, well, there's no foods that I wouldn't really have in the house. And then I thought, actually, I haven't bought a jar of Nutella in a few years. And that was, again, like if I was somewhere and there was Nutella at someone's house, or if someone brought it into my house, there wouldn't be any stress around that. But I do know if there's a jar of Nutella, it's probably getting eaten quite quickly.
Yeah, right.
Because it is that. And I really like that phrase, like nudge, because I think I've used the term food cues, CUES. But I like the nudge because the nudge is a little bit more like, oh,
yeah,
could just have a crumpet with a nice thick layer of Nutella on.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's, it makes sense from a human psychology perspective that would be, I think we're used to talking in recovery about temptation as like this diet culture concept. And it part of it's just sometimes diet culture has taken foods and made them forbidden. And that's why the temptation that we don't allow. And yes, there is a pathology around it, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's just because, oh, it's delicious, yummy, colorful food, or it's just good and it's there. So yeah, we're going to feel like, I think that's a really normal thing. I don't think we have to constantly be battling that. It's just, I think once you deconstruct a lot of fear and you feel more grounded around food, you have the freedom to make these choices without it being a thing.
Mm. And I think I've shared before, the pack of 4 large supermarket cookies that you get in the UK is something I wouldn't buy because, then I've got these 4 big cookies, and that for me, it's like I either throw cookies away or I eat more than what I might feel comfortable eating. Oh, and I don't want to have to make those decisions. I don't want to deal with it. So even though I love those cookies, and occasionally you can get them on their own, and then I might have one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anne has made a comment in the chat, and she says it's my headspace that dictates whether I binge on what's in my house, not the food. I can really relate to that. Yeah. There were times, especially with the whole habituation thing and having foods in the house, where I'd bring all the foods in and it would be great. I felt really free around them and I didn't feel compulsive and I was just enjoying them here and there. And then I'd have a day where my mind was in a different set and I would eat everything in the house and go, oh, this doesn't work.
Absolutely. I completely agree. This reminds me of, we are recording this podcast right after Easter, and we went to my in-laws, and I always bring and make or buy Italian Easter pies for dessert. So we have rice pie, we have wheat pie, and we have sweet ricotta cheesecake pie, kind of pie. And we get them once a year and they're delicious and they're part of my memory of growing up. I just love them. And some years when we have them, I'm like, let's take them home and, just have a piece tonight. And we do, and it's great and it's fine. And other years, this year in particular, I've been under a lot of stress. We've got a lot going on at home. And so the nudges are going to be a lot more compelling to me because I'm stressed. I need comfort. My head is elsewhere. Like I'm not as regulated. So those, having those 3 pies around, because guess what? I always get those pies like, I want my children to grow up with the pies the way I did. And they're like, no, we don't like that. We would like some ice cream, please. So I'm the one who eats the pie. So I'm like, I don't need 4 pies in my fridge this year. So I'm like, okay. And I brought a piece of each one home instead of the whole pie because my in-laws don't really like them, I don't think. So I got rid of the rest. And it was kind of like, some years I don't, and some years I do. And it's like I had another piece the next day. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it on Easter. I feel like I got my Easter fix. And that's it. And that's what I'm good with right now. Again, understanding that as not restricting was a process, but I'm very comfortable with at this point.
I think people listening might have a few questions about this concept. And I guess there's 2 that stand out. One is, how do we handle nudges? How do we navigate nudges? How do people navigate nudges? And the second one being how to differentiate a nudge from, I don't know, something that needs to be honored.
Yeah. This is a hard one to answer because it, to me, has become a feeling or a knowing of some kind. And perhaps the place you are in recovery might later but give you a clue. So in the beginning, when I was first allowing myself and truly giving myself permission to eat things, I pretty much considered all nudges as mental hunger, and I honored it in the name of the fact that I didn't have experience with honoring mental hunger. So my body didn't trust me, and my mind really did need that. Whereas now I feel like I can tell the difference between mental hunger and a nudge because there is absolute peace around saying, I don't want the rest of the pies for the week. Like I'm done with the pie. There's no sense of, I guess it comes to a feeling, like there's no sense of fear or oh no, or rebellion. It's a very clear feeling. Whereas mental hunger is not. When I have mental hunger around something, it's more like, oh no, I need to have that. And if I don't, I know what's going to happen. I can feel that in a prediction. And to me, it's a sense, which is really unfortunate because it's really hard to describe that. It's really hard to put into language. It's just, I guess if I had to, it would be one, it feels like a yearning. It feels like a coming forward. It feels like there is some kind of alertness, a little bit of aloofness about it. Whereas a nudge that I can feel free to say no to and it's not restriction is much more grounded. It feels clear. There's not confusion. I can move away from that without thinking more about it.
So what it's putting me in mind of then, for people who are perhaps not as far along as you are in the process, is until food is less conflicted. I think because conflict, it confuses everything, right? Because there's 2 different parts like pushing against each other. You don't know which one to listen to. You don't know which one is quote unquote right. And from that conflicted place, we can't figure it out.
Right.
So for me, then the question would be to the listener, dear listener, getting into a place of removing that conflict first. Like yours, for example, Steph, was you went all in. It's like, I'm going to honor this extreme hunger, whether it's mental, whether it's physical. I'm just honoring that. And that was a very clear decision. And because it was a clear decision, like when you described the granola, it's like, I know I'm eating a lot of granola. Maybe I feel uncomfortably full, but I'm not conflicted about it because I've made that a decision.
Right.
Then you can start listening from that place.
Right. Yes. That's why I think the way you recovered is so much harder. It really is, because I feel like there's more opportunity for conflict. For me, it was I used that black and whiteism as a way of navigating it. It wasn't an option for me to think about nudges until later because I knew I had this other work to do first. And that was clear to me. And I think you put that really well. Like it is about this sense of conflict. And if there is some kind of should I, shouldn't I, it's hard to know what to do. And for me, I had made that effort clear. I suppose, though, per Anne's question, the headspace, right, might be a way in of figuring that out. What headspace are we in? That might be a good indication of how to proceed with a decision or how to determine what's best for us. Is not having it around clearing things up for me or the opposite. You know what I mean? And so when the headspace feels clear, that might be an indication that like, yeah, I feel like I can be with this food. I can have this food and keep my head about me. or I absolutely don't feel like I can. And that might be like, okay, then maybe right now there's a different answer. There's a different way of being with this food.
Well, I'm now thinking with the permission part. So many people, I think, are going into, okay, I'll give myself permission around food from a conflicted place. They're doing it, but
Right.
they're conflicted about what they're doing. And I think it's
Yeah.
not going to work. I'm not saying that
Yeah, I
it
agree.
works for everybody anyway, but it's not going to work when there's that conflict. The kind of things I did to get around the conflict was around intention setting. And again, the one I've shared hundreds of times before by now, probably, was saying to myself, I can eat whatever I want. The only condition is I have to really enjoy it and be aware of what I'm doing. Like I couldn't allow myself to go unconscious around food. So as long as I was conscious, not going unconscious, I could say it's not binging, and that was a win, and that took away the conflict around it because
Yes.
it wasn't restriction.
Right. I think a more concrete way of talking about it is, and for some clients, having all the foods in the house is absolutely the right way to go. And I think, and I don't mean right as in I determine it's right. So that's what they believe is right, and it works for them. And that's a decision they make. And there's sometimes an internal knowing, like, this is what I need to do. And I think for those people, it is more of that sense of, I am not in conflict about this is what needs to be done. And so I am allowing this to be. And when I want to eat it, I'm eating it knowing that that's okay with me. And then there's others who feel there is still this conflict. There's this idea of, I want to be able to have these things in the house. And what I hear is that I should have them around me more. So I will. It's the right thing to do in my mind, but not in my body. Like there's some other part of us that's not on board. And for that type of person, I would say more to like where there's fear foods, to have these things more intentionally. Like I don't think you need to bring all of these foods around and have them there just on principle if there's the conflict about it. But where there is a true, like, I would like to have this food. My friend mentioned pretzel M&Ms, and now I can't stop thinking about them. So I am going to go have that food, where it's more intentional and specific to seek those foods out when that craving really hits. That's more of I think an approach that might be more helpful, is to have things as they come up in your life and to offer yourself the permission in that moment, rather than having them constantly be around and constantly dealing with that conflict. But again, I've also seen that where, it's like, well, then when that moment comes and we're like, no, I'm afraid I don't want to have that food. It's like, how much are we able to honor these cravings or honor the intention to have something? If, that's a different I think when we've got restriction at play or orthorexia at play, sometimes that will come up where there is a craving and it's kind of like, yeah, but I can get away with not, because it's not around. So I won't. I'm just going to keep avoiding. So there has to be some kind of integrity around, I don't mean integrity, I mean like an authentic honesty inside around, when I really want something, I am giving myself permission to go have that food in the name of recovering, but I don't want that around me all the time. And that's personal too. I think knowing when we're ready to really do that.
Mm-hmm. Keep thinking back to permission. And I think that so many people are feeling desperate about not wanting to be the way they are around food. And then hearing people out there talking about permission, that's the way through, go through permission and everything will be fine. And hearing that and embracing it, but like from a fear perspective, from a like, okay, I don't know what else to do. And this person's saying this and it worked for them. Okay, so I'm going to do it. That feels very different to a way I've heard you talk about it before, when you read the Effort Diet. And although you read a book, so like this was someone else like laying out a way, the way you describe it was like it spoke to you at a very deep level, and it came up. So it was almost this sort of like the bottom up realization of, this is for me, this is what I need to do, as opposed to I'm searching for an answer. I keep bumping into this permission thing. Okay, fine. I'll do the permission
Right.
thing. Like that feels, it's a very different motivation. It's a very different energy behind that.
Yes. And when I first started coaching, I assumed everyone was like me, right? So I assumed that this was the approach because it worked so well for me, that this was the answer. And I have learned over time that and I can almost hear it in that first session when I literally have people say, what you've just described, what you've just told me, that is exactly, like, there's that resonance, the way that when I read the book, it's there for them and I can see it. And then we go in and we do it that way. And it's wonderful. And there's others where I can also see it where it's like, this isn't the way, because it's not clicking in that same way. There's too many, and you can feel that. And then we honor it differently. There's not this one size fits all. And it's interesting because there is a part of what I just described that speaks to the connection to self and knowing, what do I really need? What am I doing because I think I should be doing it versus what am I doing because this is a yes, you know what I mean? And figuring that out. And so sometimes maybe we don't know what the answer is. Maybe we don't have that resonance with this one approach. So we're confused. So for lack of a better answer, we're like, well, I'll try it that way. But we might know what's a no because we're not necessarily feeling that clarity around it. And so that's okay too. I think there might be more of a nuanced approach. There might be not. What this approach that I took was so black and white, you know what I mean? And so for someone else, it just might be more of your approach where it was more slow layers just folding on each other and like repeating themselves. And it's not as clear cut. It's not as like, here's the path, go take it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
There's the Sarahs and there's the Stefs.
There is. I remember that first episode. I was like, we're so alike. And then as this gone on, it's just been more and more like, no, we're not at all. We are at all. We are.
We are. Yeah. Philosophically. What is the word can I say?
Philosophically.
I'm putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Yeah. Does anyone watching have any questions or comments about
Is anyone watching?
We lost them.
I'm like, did my screen freeze?
Yeah.
I do like the live episodes though. They tell you how long we've actually been recording.
Which is helpful.
Zoom
Yeah, we could do with that in life. But yeah.
I also wanted to say that you know me and ice cream. God, I love ice cream so much. And I did, and that was a big trigger, charged food, fear food, all of it for me. And it isn't anymore. I love it still. But interestingly, when I thought about this topic, I was like, that's so interesting that ice cream isn't something I struggle with anymore, because I would have bet money on that food being the one that I would never be able to have around with any sense of regulation. And that isn't true, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that like M&Ms have something that ice cream doesn't, because I like ice cream better. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. They just call in different ways.
Yeah. Like I'm okay. I had an ice cream cake in the house. Ice cream cake is my favorite, as we've talked about. We haven't talked about that in a long time, so I can bring it up again. And whenever we have leftover ice cream cake, it's one of those things where it's in this glass Pyrex in my freezer. And the next day when I see it, I'm like, yes, we have more ice cream. And I can take it out. I can eat right out of it. I don't even have to cut myself a piece. I can eat out of it and then put it away. Ridiculous. I mean, to me, this is like insane that I don't need to keep going with that. And my memory of that is strong. Like the association of eating out of a container or, eating ice cream out of a bowl, like not properly in a portion, but just the whole mass of ice cream, that has an association for me of muscle memory, but it doesn't show up anymore. Whereas M&Ms do. And that was never a food that I even really identified with. So you never really know.
Can't always get there.
It's a mystery sometimes.
It is. Anne has commented that it's not that I want to be unconscious. I just want to be distracted when I'm in that mood.
Yeah.
And I don't really love the food. I think, sometimes I use the word unconscious. And for me, sometimes it was about wanting to be unconscious, but sometimes it was, I just want tomorrow to be here already. Like for me, it was sometimes about like just being distracted from this time. Like, I suppose I think I was in pain and I just wanted to feel better.
But sometimes I don't even think it's that acute. It's like, but Anne says, I can't make myself stop and think in that mood. So I eat anything. That's sort of like autopilot eating. It's not necessarily that you're even for me. It's sometimes I'm more likely to fall into that when I'm not particularly distressed by anything, just more of the autopilotness because of the place I'm in mentally. Not that it's an awful place. It's just, I just don't have the consciousness right then. And that I think is a great time to make the choice, right? Right. That would exactly be the time where I'm like, you know what? I don't need these things around me in my view, because I'm going to go on autopilot, because I'm just, for whatever the reason is, whether it's because our brains are just busy doing other things, whether it's because we have slight dysregulation, whether it's a hormonal, like whatever the reason might be, that's more to the point, I think, of the times where I'm going to make that choice to not have it around because it's just distracting me from whatever it is that it's very hard to pin down. Actually, I think this is a concept that still remains elusive to me as far as what is that?
Well, it's back to the state of mind comment, isn't it?
Hmm.
That when you're in a sort of a calm state of mind, decision making is easy, right? You can go, what is
Yes.
it that I really fancy? And you can feel into that, and the decisions just feel much more intuitive. But when we're like, I don't know, like tense or constricted, and then trying to make decisions from that place, and then we're going to likely just go for the easier or the quickest thing available, which is
Yeah.
going to be the thing in eyeline. It's going to be the thing that might give us a quick
Yes.
hit or even a boost or something like that.
Yeah.
So I might
Yep.
think of like, am I feeling kind of constricted, or am I feeling open and okay?
Yes.
I'll just read Melissa's comment. I'm in the messy middle of recovery still. Before now, I was doing well with having all my challenging foods in the house, but lately I'm feeling that that approach is no longer safe for me. Would this change for a person? And now I don't want to throw out those more risky foods, but I also don't think it's good that it's here. I'm wondering, again, it kind of goes back to what your current state might be. It also doesn't have to be all or nothing. I think there's this idea that I have all the foods in the house or I have nothing. It might be what might be enough foods to have in the house, whereby you have some foods in that you can reach for when you want them and that you enjoy them, but not necessarily to the quantities or even the amount of different foods that might make you feel more unsafe in your current mind state. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I would say that, yes, I think it can change. So if in the beginning it felt like having those foods around was helpful or productive, and then something changes, I believe that, yes, it can. Just to answer the question directly, yeah, I do.
And Melissa said, but they're all already here. Well, that made me think about you and the pie, Steph. Like you said, actually, I don't want this food around. And in that was the right thing for you in that moment to get rid of it. Not saying, Melissa, that that's the right thing for you, but I guess it's testing it out with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm getting the get rid of it urge. There's something in that, even saying that, like, as it, like, because I think that is a pathologized thing. Like, if you want to get rid of it, you must be restricting. Right. And so I don't always think it definitely can be true. There definitely restriction and I just want to get rid of it so it's not around. It can absolutely be part of restriction, but not always. And so how do we differentiate? You mentioned safe. And I think where safety is concerned, we're feeling like you're not safe having those foods around. There's that stretch zone of when something doesn't necessarily feel entirely safe, but it's within a zone of proximal development, right? But doing that thing and moving out of the comfort zone a little is going to help us. And then there's a zone where it's just beyond and it really doesn't feel safe and it's actually making things worse. And I think knowing where that line is part of it too. Like, is this a helpful kind of discomfort or is it an unsafe kind of discomfort?
Well, Melissa said not the throw it out, but the eat to get rid of the urge. And yeah, very familiar with that one, isn't it? It's just, I'm just going to eat it all now so that it's not there.
To reduce the conflict.
Yeah. And then
I wonder though, if, like, is there a difference between those two? Does it feel like, no, I don't want to throw it out. That scares me, but I would eat it. Because if it feels like maybe removing it from your immediate environment for the time being might be helpful, could you wrap your head around that? Or is it like, no, I want to eat it? Because that's a different thing, I think. Mm-hmm. B says, I'm still craving Easter eggs because I feel like I've missed out on all the Easter fun. I want to get some chocolate in to enjoy, but I'm scared it's too bound up with emotion. Thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the tension place again. And so I'm just going to share my experience because I don't want to give this out necessarily as advice to you, B. But for me, from that tense place, I would say to myself things like, okay, have the chocolate when you can actually enjoy it. I want to have it in a relaxed state because I know if I eat chocolate in that tensed, conflicted, stressed out state, that would have been the thing that might have actually led to a binge. Because then I would have had it, still felt stressed about having it, not feel satisfied because I'm so stressed and conflicted about having it. And now I want more. And I broke my resolve because I had some. And that's the thing that would lead me into a binge. So it's like calming your system down first and then enjoy some chocolate if you can. But, okay. Well, I think we better wrap it up there.
Thanks for your questions. Thanks for the topic suggestion. I hope it was helpful. And if more questions come up from it, please feel free to pop them in and email us or rate and review.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye. I don't know what to do now.
You have to, I know, because you're live on your Facebook, so you've got to go to your Facebook thing.
I'll do this.
Should be at the top somewhere.
I just ended it. I just X'd it.
No, it's still saying live on mine. It's still live on Facebook. Okay, it's still there.
Wait. So I could just
You
really
still have live on the top corner.
Well, I just had to open it up again. But does that mean that if I would have X'd it out, it would still be recording and I wouldn't have known?
Yeah.
That's stinky.
If you go to more, there must be.
Hold on. Oh, right. Let's go to more. Yeah.